Welcome to our deep dive into the fascinating world of computer vision. Today, we're exploring the fundamental architecture that allows machines to see, convolutional neural networks or CNNs. The title of this presentation, From Pixel to Perception, perfectly encapsulates the journey we'll be tracing, the process by which a computer takes millions of seemingly meaningless numerical values, the pixels, and constructs a holistic understanding of an image, which we call perception. Look at the diagram on the screen. It visualizes exactly this. The visual input, represented here by an eye, is broken down by layers of processing into primitive features, like edges, colors, and textures. These features are then encoded into a precise, numerical structure known as a tensor. This entire process is about hierarchical learning. We are going to explore the building blocks of this mechanism, learning how neural networks dismantle a complex visual scene into fundamental, learnable components, enabling tasks from simple object identification to autonomous driving. Understanding this transformation is key to mastering modern deep learning. Before a machine can perceive an image, it first has to understand what an image actually is, numerically speaking. For us, an apple is a picture, but for a computer, it's a highly structured grid of numbers called a tensor. Tensors are essentially multidimensional arrays, and deep learning models treat images as 3D tensors. These three dimensions are crucial: height, width, and channels. Height and width are straightforward, defining the image resolution. The channel's dimension, however, relates to color information. For a simple grayscale image, you only have one channel, which represents the intensity or brightness of the pixel. But for a standard color image, like the RGB image shown here, we have three distinct channels: one for red, one for green, and one for blue. If you look closely at a single element, a single pixel, it is represented by a triplet of numbers, R, G, and B values, ranging typically from 0 to 255. In our example, a specific pixel might be R equals 210, G equals 65, B equals 40. Our ultimate goal is to build a mathematical system, the CNN, that can efficiently analyze this massive grid of numbers and identify meaningful, higher-level patterns within this dense numerical data. The very first step in feature extraction often begins with the simplest building block, a single neuron acting as a filter. In this context, a filter is a tiny mechanism designed to detect one very specific feature within a single pixel. Let's construct a simple example, a yellow detector. As we know from color theory, pure yellow is a combination of maximum red and maximum green, but minimum blue. We can translate this chemical relationship into a mathematical filter by assigning weights to the input channels. We give a positive weight, +1, to the red input and +1 to the green input, effectively rewarding their presence. Crucially, we assign a negative weight, -1, to the blue input, penalizing its presence. When this operation, the weighted sum, is applied to every single pixel across the entire input image, the result is a new single-channel output. This new map, often called a feature map, doesn't show the color yellow, but rather the yellowness score for every location in the original image. Pixels that score high light up brightly in the feature map, indicating a strong presence of the detected feature. This fundamental idea, designing a lightweight, specialized detector, is the core concept that scales up to full CNNs. While a 1x1 filter is excellent for detecting color features, real-world vision requires detecting spatial patterns like edges and textures. To achieve this, we expand the filter's footprint to analyze a pixel's local neighborhood. This input area is formally called the local receptive field. Typically, we move from a 1x1 footprint to a 3x3 footprint, meaning the filter now looks at 9 pixels simultaneously. By using a larger footprint, a single filter can now detect more complex spatial patterns, such as horizontal edges, vertical edges, or even blurring effects. The mathematics remains the same. The filter multiplies its fixed set of weights with the corresponding input values in its footprint and sums the results to produce a single output value. On the screen, you can see 3 classic examples of 3x3 filters. The blur filter uses uniform, positive weights, 1, 9, across the entire field, averaging the pixel values. The horizontal edge detector uses positive values at the top, 0 in the middle, and negative values at the bottom. When this filter scans an image, it finds sharp transitions from light to dark or vice versa, highlighting horizontal lines. Similarly, the vertical edge detector uses positive weights on the left, 0 in the middle, and negative weights on the right, effectively isolating vertical edges. This ability to detect shapes and orientations using localized patterns is what allows CNNs to build upon simple features. This slide introduces the crucial operation that gives convolutional neural networks their name, the convolutional sweep. Convolution is the systematic process of sliding a filter, or kernel, across the entire input tensor to generate a compressed output called a feature map. As the slide illustrates, the filter, here a 3x3 matrix, is systematically swept or scanned across the input tensor, usually moving one step or one stride at a time. At each position, the filter performs its primary calculation. Element-wise multiplication of the filter weights with the underlying input values, followed by summing up the results. This entire multiply and sum operation produces just a single numerical value in the output feature map. In the diagram, the blue 3x3 filter starts in the top left corner, performs its calculation, and yields an output value of 2 in the top left corner of the output map. It then shifts one position to the right and repeats the process, calculating the next value. This process continues until the filter has covered the entire input tensor. The resulting 2D grid, the feature map, is critical because it represents the spatial locations where the specific feature, say, a vertical edge or a yellow spot, detected by that filter is present in the input image. This elegant, repetitive process turns raw pixel data into structured feature representations. When performing the convolutional sweep, we immediately encounter a practical problem known as the shrinking output issue, which is illustrated on the left. If we only apply the filter where its footprint fits entirely within the input grid, the dimensions of our feature map will necessarily shrink with every layer. For a 10x10 input using a 3x3 filter, the output shrinks to 8x8. If we stack many layers, the output quickly becomes tiny, and critically, we lose valuable information present at the borders of the original image, because those edge pixels are sampled fewer times than the central pixels. The solution to this problem is padding. Padding involves adding a border of extra elements, typically zeros, around the perimeter of the input tensor, as shown on the right. By adding this zero padding, we allow the filter to be centered over every original element, including those right on the edge. This small adjustment is powerful. It preserves the output's width and height, ensuring that a 10x10 input combined with padding results in a 10x10 output feature map. This guarantees that information at the edges is processed just as thoroughly as information in the center, preventing significant data loss as the image passes through multiple convolutional layers. So far, we've focused on one filter detecting one feature. However, the real power of a single convolutional layer lies in its ability to apply many different filters simultaneously, creating a rich, multi-channel output. In practice, a convolutional layer is not just one filter. It bundles tens or even hundreds of filters together. Each of these filters is trained to look for something unique. One might look for vertical edges, another for 45-degree angles, and yet another for a specific color patch. Critically, every filter operates independently on the CN channels of the input tensor. When a convolutional layer finishes its work, the resulting feature maps, one for each filter, are stacked together. If the layer uses n filters, the output tensor will have n channels. This output depth, or the number of channels, is always equal to the number of filters you define in that specific layer. For instance, if you input a 3-channel RGB image and apply 64 filters, you will output a tensor with 64 channels. Each channel represents a unique learned feature, providing the next layer in the network with a wealth of different feature representations to build upon. This multi-channel approach is key to capturing the complexity of visual data. The concept of hierarchical feature detectors found in CNNs is not a mathematical invention alone. It is deeply inspired by biological vision systems. Consider the simple case of a toad. Biologists theorize that specialized cells in a toad's eye act as early-stage feature detectors. These cells are highly tuned to specific patterns, such as small, moving, dark spots, and they only fire when they detect something corresponding to potential prey, like a fly. This mechanism allows the toad to quickly and efficiently filter the world for survival-critical information. This concept of specialization extends even to the human brain. A famous 2005 study identified what researchers dubbed the Jennifer Aniston neuron in a volunteer's brain. This single neuron fired almost exclusively in response to viewing photos of the actress Jennifer Aniston, suggesting highly specific, high-level specialization. CNNs operate on an analogous principle. As the network learns, individual filters evolve to become increasingly specialized detectors. Low-level filters detect basic edges, mid-level filters combine those edges into complex textures and corners, and high-level filters combine those parts into things like noses or eyes. The goal is to create a hierarchy where specific neurons or filters are dedicated to identifying specific, relevant features. After creating specialized feature detectors, we encounter one of the main challenges in computer vision, the problem of imperfection and misalignment. Our convolutional filters, as we've designed them, are mathematically rigid. They are trained to look for an exact pattern in an exact location within the receptive field. If we train a filter to find a perfect capital T, and then the image shifts even slightly, the filter will fail to report a strong match. This is illustrated in the example here. The perfect T filter matches the perfect image perfectly, but look at the misprinted image, where one column of pixels has shifted down. Although the T is still completely recognizable to any human observer, the rigid filter fails catastrophically. The pixels it expects to be on are now off, and vice versa, resulting in many mismatches marked with red X's. This dramatically lowers the match score, dropping it to a mere 15%. This lack of tolerance for slight shifts or distortions, known as translational variance, is a major limitation for real-world application, where inputs are rarely perfect. We need a way to build robustness into our network, making it sensitive to the presence of a feature, rather than its exact location. The solution to the rigid filter problem is pooling. Pooling provides what is called translational invariance, meaning it makes the network robust to minor shifts, rotations, or distortions in the location of a feature. Instead of making the filter blurry, we effectively blur the feature map after convolution. The most common form is max pooling. Max pooling takes a small window, often 2x2, and slides it across the input feature map. For every position, it outputs only the maximum value found within that small region. This process asks a fundamental question: was the feature present somewhere in this local area, rather than was the feature present at this exact spot? As the diagram shows, the output feature map retains only the highest scores from each 2x2 section. This ensures that if the T pattern we discussed earlier shifts slightly, the shifted T still lands within one of the pooling windows, and the max pooling operation will successfully capture the high activation score. An important bonus of pooling is downsampling. A 4x4 input feature map becomes a 2x2 output feature map. This reduces the size of the tensor, making the network smaller, faster, and much more computationally efficient for subsequent layers. Now that we've established the fundamental building blocks, convolution, padding, and pooling, we can look at the architectural masterpiece that is a convolutional neural network. By stacking these layers sequentially, a CNN constructs a hierarchy of perception, moving from simple, reusable patterns to recognizing complex objects. Let's trace this process using a network designed to recognize a simple face mask. The network operates in 3 conceptual layers. Layer 1 uses low-level filters to detect fundamental primitives, such as horizontal lines, vertical lines, and corners, represented by the T, Q, L, and R filters. These are the simplest possible shapes. Layer 2 takes those primitives and combines them. It learns to recognize mid-level parts like eyes, E, noses, N, and mouths, M, by looking for specific spatial arrangements of the primitives. Finally, Layer 3 acts as the master assembler. It combines the high-level parts, eyes, nose, mouth, to recognize a complete object, such as a face, F, or a profile, P. This hierarchical approach is what gives CNNs their incredible power. By starting simple and gradually building complexity, the network learns to extract and categorize incredibly complex features from simple, reusable components, allowing it to generalize its knowledge effectively. Let's walk through the face recognition hierarchy in more detail. Starting with the 12x12 input image of the face mask, Layer 1 begins the process of transforming pixels into basic shapes. We apply four 2x2 filters, T, Q, L, and R, which represent basic primitives. The convolutional sweep creates four separate 11x11 feature maps. Immediately following convolution, we apply a crucial step, 2x2 max pooling. This downsamples each feature map, summarizing local regions and creating translational invariants. The output of Layer 1 is now a 6x6x4 tensor, where the four channels represent the locations of the T, Q, L, and R shapes. The pooling step makes the system robust to minor shifts, like a slightly shifted eye. Next, Layer 2 begins to form parts from these primitives. We introduce three new filters, E, eye, N, nose, and M, mouth. These are now two x2x4 filters, meaning they look for patterns across all four channels of the previous layer's output simultaneously. For example, the eye filter E might look for a specific configuration of T, Q, L, and R primitives to confirm the presence of an eye. This convolution results in three new feature maps, which are again reduced by 2x2 max pooling. The final output of Layer 2 is a compact 3x3x3 tensor. This tensor doesn't contain pixel data. It represents the abstracted locations of the three main facial parts, eyes, nose, and mouth, preparing the data for the final classification step. We have arrived at the final assembly stage, recognizing the face itself. The input to this final layer is the 3x3x3 tensor from the previous pooling layer. Importantly, this tensor no longer contains raw pixel data. Instead, it numerically represents the locations of the high-level features found by Layer 2, the eyes E, noses N, and mouths M. To classify the image, we apply high-level filters that look for specific spatial arrangements of these parts. We introduce two candidate filters, Filter F, face, and Filter P, profile. Filter F, the face filter, looks for the expected frontal pattern, two eyes in the top corners E, a nose in the middle N, and a mouth below it M. When we apply the face filter to our input tensor, it matches the pattern perfectly, resulting in a high activation score, which translates to a match. The resulting output tensor is 1x1x2, containing the final scores for each possible classification. Conversely, Filter P, the profile filter, would look for a different arrangement, perhaps all features shifted to one side, and would result in a no match. Because our input tensor strongly matches the face filter's pattern, the network correctly classifies the image as a face. This stage demonstrates how the hierarchical structure, aided by pooling, allows the network to correctly classify the image based on the relative arrangement of parts, even with the initial misalignment that would have fooled our simple, rigid filters. Up to this point, we have hand-designed all of our filters, the yellow detector, the edge detectors, and the T, Q, L, R, E, N, M filters. This was done purely to illustrate the core principles. However, the true, revolutionary power of CNNs lies in the fact that they discover the optimal filters automatically. Our face mask detector, in reality, was an expert system where we acted as the engineers. In a real-world convolutional network, the process is far more dynamic and powerful. Filters start with completely random numerical values, as seen on the left under Filters at Initialization. The network is then shown millions of training examples. Through the iterative training process, known as backpropagation and gradient descent, the network learns the perfect values for thousands of filters needed to solve the task. It learns the most effective hierarchy of features entirely on its own. For instance, if its task is to distinguish a cat from an airplane, the network doesn't need to be told to look for fur or wings. It spontaneously discovers that the most predictive low-level edges, mid-level textures, and high-level shapes are the ones that must be learned. The image on the right shows learned, meaningful filters, which have converged on optimal representations like edges, color blobs, and gradients, ready to power high-accuracy classification. To conclude our exploration, let's quickly recap the four essential building blocks that make up the architecture of modern computer vision. First, we have the convolution layer. This is the core engine, applying a set of learnable filters to the input to detect specific features, producing a distinct feature map for each. Second, we have padding. This practical technique preserves the spatial dimensions of the input by adding a zero border, preventing information loss, especially at the edges, as the data moves deeper into the network. Third, we utilize pooling and striding. Pooling, especially max pooling, downsamples the feature maps to provide crucial translational invariance, the network's robustness to shifts, while simultaneously improving computational efficiency. And finally, the overall structure forms a hierarchy. Stacking these layers allows the CNN to build incredibly complex, high-level feature detectors, like faces and profiles, from simple, reusable, low-level components like lines and corners. While CNNs are spectacularly successful for image recognition, the principles of convolution are now extending far beyond images. Convolutional techniques are being adapted for natural language processing, classifying sentences, and analyzing time series data, demonstrating that this concept truly represents a fundamental breakthrough in machine learning across diverse domains.